Okay, so up next, we have The Future of Naming Systems on the Internet by Lakshman Sankar from Personae.
Hello? Cool. Clicker. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Lakshman. I'm with Personae, where we're sort of thinking about what happens when every computing device can make zero-knowledge statements. So this talk is, I guess, for this audience, I would interpret it as sort of contextualizing the application class that's like most interesting to us and that we're spending all our time on. So I'll start with a little bit of like a fluffy, high-minded kind of like a little bit of history and story and visionary stuff. Bear with me on that, and then I'll promise to get into sort of like the meat of like what we're doing right now. And finally, I talk a little bit about what we're thinking about next, including kind of like a hint at some of our research roadmap and things like this. So just as a temperature check, so I understand kind of like context in the room, who here has read this book, True Names by Werner Vinge? Oh, wow, okay. Oh, wait, who is that? Is that someone? Oh, all right, Zaki, of course. So I think this is probably the one story that is sort of like most pushed my own thinking on identity. I'd posit it's like one of those really prophetic sci-fi stories that like takes the real extreme of what could be true if like the most extreme version of something happened. It's almost like, I think, to identity, kind of how I think about like the sovereign individual to Bitcoin or something like that. But in this book, written in I think the 80s or 70s or something like that. It's like one of the original like cyberpunk books. Everyone in cyberspace has names that are entirely separated from their true names. And in fact, they make a lot of effort. Like they gather in these things called covens, which are like guilds, I suppose, and they make a real point to they form real relationships and do real things together, but make a real point not to connect to the true name so they can be safe from the great adversary, which is sort of like, I suppose, the government or something like that. And one of the things that's really cool, it's kind of a thought experiment, what happens if true names are completely separated from like the pseudonyms we have like online. In the story, at least, and I find this quite inspirational, they do a lot of really cool, exciting things together. It feels like they have much more freedom to coordinate. There's like less worry about sort of connection to the physical world and stuff like that. And so, yeah, and as a slight, tiny spoiler, I think it forces one to think what's possible when humans and maybe even AIs can coordinate online without knowing anything about the true world. All right, so now I'm going to give a tiny, very opinionated history lesson. About names on the internet. So I think, like the mythology of Web 1 was, this is not a Web 1 forum, this is a modern forum reconstructed to look like a Web 1 forum, but was these sort of GeoCities-esque forums with completely non-true names. It's just like random words people have put together to represent themselves to other people. And no connection to true names most of the time. I think one of the reasons that this sort of died out was, reputation was not really portable between these systems, and there wasn't really enough going on at the internet at this time to sort of have meaningful reputation. So names didn't stick. And then, of course, the rise of Web 2 was the rise, I think, of true names on the internet. I picked this post because it's a post where Zuck said that he was going to be completely open about all of his content, and you would be all true names-y. I posit that the reason that these names have stuck for as long as they have is because they allowed us to bootstrap internet identity with off-internet reputation. Like initially, like that you went to an Ivy League school, or that like, you went to this school or had this job or something like that, or you are this person. And it also became a way for people to do things off internet with their internet identity, and so that linkage was very, very valuable. But I'd also posit that, and this is like, the classic I feel like I'm a little cliche in hating on Web 2 this way, but it feels like this was a very convenient tool, like keeping things de-anonymized, keeping things to people's true names was both like a growth mechanism because, identity was bootstrapped, reputation was bootstrapped, but also was like a great vector for power accumulation, especially as things like certain elections happened and stuff like that. And so finally, names on the internet today. I think we're starting kind of like a new phase. It's mostly emergent. It doesn't feel like the platforms are native yet. So we're seeing some of it kind of come out on Twitter, but Twitter wasn't built with this in mind. But we're starting to see names or NIMs, non-true names that have like real power, and true names. And this is a great, like Degen Spartan interacting with Suzu. These are both like names that have power. So one sure is bootstrapped to the real world, but one is not. And I think that it's partially because we're reaching a point where there's like so much more going on the internet today. There's sufficient internet native reputation, especially with the rise of things like Ethereum and real sort of like observable value on the internet, that you can build via meaningful power and reputation online, purely online. And so, I'm constantly trying to be critical of my own thinking here because, it's easy to pattern match, but I posit that I think things are different now than they were in 2004. Like I said before, we have meaningful internet native truth around which people can build reputation that people spend a lot of time on. It's funny that these are all one. I don't know why that happened. Two, asymmetric key cryptography is becoming very widely adopted, especially with things like Ethereum. And three, and I think the thing that's kind of relevant to a lot of conversations we'll have here later, cryptography statements about other cryptography statements, i.e. zero knowledge and later other things, homomorphic encryption, things like this, are becoming possible to do on consumer devices. So I think that these three lead to kind of what we're thinking about now is trying to build a naming system for the modern internet with this new premise in mind. All right, so I'll get a little bit down from the clouds now, talk a little bit about some of the principles that sort of govern kind of like what we spend our time on, and also talk about some of the things we've done in the process. So first of all, we are, I think, probably to an extremist level, uncompromising with this notion of client-side ZK. It doesn't seem possible to create the new types of interactions that we think are interesting unless the witness, barring some cool MPC stuff, which we're also trying to keep tabs on, barring the witness staying on the device, or at least like the private part of the witness staying on the device. And also, we think that resource-constrained environments, even though they're, unsexy, are super important. Web browsers, mobile browsers, things like this. So we spend a lot of time on client-side ZK, and we expect that in that sort of like exploration, I think we've realized that there's probably going to be likely a separation of proving systems here, where client-side stuff will happen and then be recursed into something more like a snark that can be verified on chain and stuff like that. But this is sort of, this mental model has been very core to how we decided what to build. Secondly, and this is a little fluffy again, but we live in this loop. I think we've observed a lot of teams that have like kind of failed by focusing too much on both. And when the technology sort of landscape is moving as fast as sort of like the changes in like user behavior, one needs to be entrenched in both. Like if you were just focusing on apps and not paying attention to proving systems, you would just be operating in an old paradigm. And if you would just focus on proving systems and don't look at what people are doing in like Ethereum and other places, you're probably not going to make things that are ergonomic and fit into reality. And then another one is, which is why we sort of focused, for those of us who sort of know our work, we focused a lot specifically on ECDSA in a zero knowledge proof. It's just like a very, very specific problem, but we think that like eventually things like Ethereum, if they are globally adopted, you're going to have like billion sized anonymity sets spawning up here and there. And you want people to kind of like seamlessly be able to use some infrastructure corresponding to that. And so we don't see the, we're a little worried about like SSO-like systems where you need to go into another identity system to make statements about the original identity system. We want to make statements about the identity system where things are happening. Another one that is, I think when I phrase it this way isn't controversial, but I think in practice is a little controversial is, and by the way, so this is from our app, Nouns NIMS. I'm not doxing myself here. This is a staging build, so for those of you who use this, like you're not going to learn anything by looking at this. It's super. One of the things that I think is really interesting about identity built on asymmetric key cryptography is it's fundamental that you can create a new identity in a way that's not possible with a social security number. And I think this is also one of the things that allows for like real plurality on the internet. And so we really want to make it the choice between accruing reputation to an old reputation and making a new reputation very clear in sort of like the interfaces that we create. Which is, I think, like this is actually constantly an internal discussion, but I tend to not be like that excited about proof of personhood as the way to think about Sybil resistance. It's good for other things, but I think whatever emerges as reputation in the long term is the Sybil thing. It's kind of self-reflexive definition, but that's what I believe. All right, now I'll talk a little bit about what's next. So yeah, again, this model of, so this is probably the most interesting slide for a lot of the discussions we'll have here, is, this model is sort of how we're sort of planning our proving architecture. We assume we need something that works really well for, so the other thing is we've gone down the route of like Spartan and Breakdown. We're investigating Fry. We were just chatting with Weijia about WebGPU, largely because these systems are like base field agnostic, which means that we can do right field arithmetic in whatever crypto system. But I think we're also simultaneously paying attention to lookups. I think that there probably will be a point at which lookups like kind of catch up for what we want to do here. And so we're like, kind of like trying to pay attention to that. But like this constraint made us really want to think hard about like real prover optimization for the problem we're trying to solve. But yeah, constantly paying attention and trying to figure out what the next step is. And then, like looking at trying to understand, given this system, what snark kind of like works really well here to get that information on chain. So we're spending a lot of time actually right now sort of speccing and planning this out. Kind of like more on the architecture. I haven't said exactly what we're building because we're still sort of like figuring it out, but we sort of see like the symbol registration, i.e. like the reputation symbol registration needs to be something that is like modularly separated from a lot of other things. So this is not, this slide is by no means canon, but could see a world where there's like contracts for like posting content, contracts for taking out loans, contracts for voting that utilize sort of like a thin layer of abstraction with like the symbol registration. And so we're really thinking about designing this piece such that those other things can be built. And then finally, this is kind of fun, but we started in these communities that I think intentionally were very fun forward because maybe Will would disagree. Maybe the stakes are higher now, like it's a little less fun in nouns, but because we realized that the stakes of doing damage, at least initially, would be a little lower than if we jumped into sort of names for Ethereum protocol governance or something like that. But I think we've built a lot more confidence about sort of like what we know and what we don't know. So we're also starting to kind of like dig into other places where people really care about their ETH state and understand kind of like what kind of manifestations of a name can be useful there. So some of the places we're looking at are like literal protocol governance, MEV searching, DeFi governance, and I won't mention the last one because it'll probably get me in trouble. And I forgot to upload my latest slide, which had a QR code. But yeah, we'd love to chat. I think we're exploring, we're building stuff, and we want to build with more people. We're looking for more collaborators, and yeah, we're just having a good time. So come hang out.
Awesome. Do we have any questions for Lakshman?
Hey, nice presentation. Thanks a lot. You mentioned proof of personhood before. What do you understand with that?
Man, I shouldn't have, because I don't know if this is like the right venue for me to, to express these opinions. I think one of the challenges with an one interpretation I have of, and maybe you can correct me on the current sort of modes of proof of personhood, is that the identifier is extremely challenging to exit. For example, it would require replacing one's retina or something like that. And so something about not being able to leave the identity system, while also feeling like it's like, I think knowing persons online is important, I think feels a little unsavory, but we're still kind of like figuring out our way in the trade-off space, but that's the short answer.
Can't you just expire the identities?
Yes, but you have to wait for expiration then? I mean, yeah. I mean, it's just like, okay, it's the difference between like having and being able to create identities fluidly every day versus having an identity for a window of time, I suppose. I think there's certainly obviously trade-offs there. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone. Or anyone else? Oh, yep.
Just a quick one. Where do you see the kind of classic anonymous credential systems like the BBS Plus type stuff fitting into this ecosystem, if at all?
Would like to adhere to common language and standards as much as possible. I think one of the places that I'm representing, our organization. These are my perspectives. We try to hold all the perspectives, in kind of like making decisions. But one way I feel like I've differed from a lot of the thinking in those ecosystems, I feel like the most interesting reputation will be completely inside chains. And so we don't really need to make statements about things outside that much, like very on-chain identity maximalist to a point that I think is a little irrational. But yeah, I think that's one. That's not a fundamental standards or technology perspective, but it's definitely a difference in kind of like deciding what to do. But insofar as there's like common language, I think we should all be speaking the same language.
Any other questions?
Thanks.
It's from you.